Good morning. This is Talking Devils, the leading independent Manchester United podcast. I'm your host, Wayne Barton, joined by Manchester United legend Paul Parker to talk over. I was going to say the weekend for United, but it feels like it's been a long time, Paul, maybe a month or so, because of my break and everything like that. How are you doing? You all right?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you very much, Wayne.
Good stuff. As you can see, no tan for me, even though I went to San Francisco and Los Angeles. Rained more than it does in Manchester, but I'm not here to complain about that. I'm here to complain about Manchester United. If you're watching live on YouTube or Facebook, feel free to get your questions and comments in. If you're watching on the replay, feel free to say hello. We do reply to the comments. If you're listening back on the audio podcast, be sure to subscribe and leave a review on the platform you're listening on. Oh God! Right. Newcastle 2, Manchester United nil. Paul, it used to be the saying, didn't it? Manchester United don't lose; they just run out of time. But too frequently in recent years, it's felt like it doesn't matter how much time you give United; they'll never ever get back into a game of football. And yesterday seemed like one of those. It felt like we never started. The changes, whenever the changes were made, the first changes and the second lot of changes, they never helped United. Um, Even though Martial played slightly better than what Vegos did. United never at the races. Newcastle much more aggressive. Afterwards, you've got the comments, Luke Shaw saying they wanted it more than us. Eric Ten Hag agreeing that that's what it looked like, and I mean that was the evidence. It did look like that. Newcastle got the goals from that kind of tenacity that United were desperately lacking on the day. Um, what did you make of it? I mean, a very disappointing result.
Be honest, prior to it, I was believing there was going to be something there that United were going to get some form of result from that fixture. But I think we have to say that it has been poor. There's been times when they've gone without Casemiro and they've just got over the line, but it did show yesterday that how much difference his influence makes on
Yeah,
Manchester United, and the fact of not having a number nine makes a difference as well as Big Horse has done, and he's done a good job. I think everyone knew his abilities, his actual strengths. No one, people have been moaning about saying this is not what United need, but it was what they needed at that given time. It's getting to the point where it's running its course and it's causing more frustration with people than maybe in what's needed this moment in time. Because at one point, United had to be mentioned with the title, and that's disappeared very, very quickly
yeah.
over the last 3 or 4 games. The Casemiro situation hasn't helped. When you've seen what else has gone on in football, you wonder why he ends up with 4 games. Why? And he has been a big miss. And you can see now that help was needed in January just to help that little bit get over the line, I should say. And then the other side of it, you have to say now that help is needed in the summer. I mean, big help to really for United to push on and sustain a really good, a really good position from all of next season, regardless of ups and downs. You want to believe that when a player goes missing, suspension, injury, that someone's going to come in and ready to go, and that's the bit which I think everyone saw yesterday. I saw the team that was named, and there wasn't enough energy in that middle of the park. Not energy, I mean more legs, quick feet. That's why I was surprised that Fred never started.
Yeah.
To start with Sabitzer, who I think's a decent player, and Scott McTominay together just it didn't give me much feeling that United were going to get the win, which my predictions were demanding. Um, it was just from what I saw from the team selection, and then the performance was as bad as it's been in a long, long time. There was nothing there. I mean, you've already talked about the substitutions, but there you are.
Yeah.
That's my little bit around it anyway at this moment.
Yeah, a couple of comments coming in. Ben says, "Good morning, morning, Ben. Hope you're doing well." He says, "I agree, Paul. It feels like we're in danger of the season fading out. Glad we won a trophy already." And Ronak says, "Since Ericsson was injured, our control of games has gone. No Casemiro, and our back line seems so exposed. Lack of a number nine until Martial came on was evident. We need reinforcements." Yeah, I mean, look, let's say first things first. Newcastle deserved the win. They thoroughly deserved the win. I hate when we play against them because Eddie Howe's teams are very horrible to play against. But you also have to give credit where it's due. They haven't spent hundreds of millions of pounds, and they're fighting for a Champions League spot based on Eddie Howe making them horrible to play against. And you've got to give him credit for that because that's what he's done, and he's been successful at it. And it was funny yesterday that in the early stages they were complaining about the time that De Gea was taking over goal kicks, and I think that was kind of like a, you know, planting the seed for two wrongs, not making a right, so that later on in the game when they get around to doing it, that they, it's just a tactic. They worked it very well yesterday. United were not at the races; they were very poor. Like you said, in all areas of the pitch, really. And even the manager. Normally, we don't give him a lot of criticism when United lose games, but I think he deserved a share of it yesterday because um, when it came to it, I know he spoke after the game and said that the sort of wild card changes he made on the 83rd minute, bringing off both of the centre backs, that it was because we were 1-0 down and you throw the kitchen sink at it. But I felt even then, well, there's no rhyme or reason to this. It's not panic stations. They were organised, and really, you were creating panic within our own team. That only works when you've got a rhythm in your team and you're trying to break a side down. And we weren't at that stage. We never had that kind of comfort where you could throw in another chaos element and it would make the backline panic. We had nothing at all. We had one forward in Martial for the last 30 minutes because for the first hour we didn't have one in Vegas. And I do wonder, without being too worried about like Ben says, the season fading out, because we've got players to come back, and Casemiro will come back, and Eriksen will make a big difference, I'm sure, when he's hopefully imminently due to return. But I do look around the play. You mentioned Casemiro being a big miss, and you look at maybe the effects of the signings that Ten Hag made, which is undeniable. But then you look at the players behind and start to ask the question: how much have they improved really overall the season? Like early on, we were saying, Dallow's really kicked on. McTominay in the early weeks of the season was playing well, but as soon as he had the stinker against Man City, he was out. He was bombed out, and he was never back in. Fred's responded fairly well, but fairly well to the point you would say you would want him in your squad, but not as a permanent starter. I mean, we can say Wan-Bissaka's improved, Luke Shaw's improved, but Luke Shaw tends to do that on a season off. If he's got competition, he'll do that. How much of that is down to the manager? Marcus Rashford, we can give Ten Hag credit for that because it's more of a game plan organised in the front third of the field and everything. I'm not saying that Ten Hag doesn't deserve credit. I'm just asking the question, Paul, because I think he does deserve credit. So sorry if it's a leading question, but I just look at it and I think, do you think that maybe we're at the stage of the season where you're finding out a few of these players, like McTominay, like Dalot, that their ceiling, no matter how much Ten Hag has improved the general surroundings at the club and the general atmosphere and the general performance levels of many players, there are certain players that have a ceiling that they're just not going to be able to push on. And we're finding that limitation in games like yesterday. McTominay did really well in the international break, but when he's asked to influence a sort of Champions League level fixture in a Premier League level, he's not going to dictate that, and it's unfair to expect that he's going to, because nobody reasonably expects him to be able to do that. So everyone was kind of thinking, oh, maybe with confidence he might be able to do that. Maybe that's an unfair level of expectation. We know that Dalot is suspect defensively. Do you think that this is the critical area now? We're being fair to these players because they've, by and large, they've responded fairly well, and they're not down in tools, but it's a different step to say maybe you're just not good enough to get us over the line for that. And this is where we're finding that out.
Well, when you're playing for a club that wants to be at the levels of Manchester United, you have to have players that are going to give you a certain level of performance, and there's certain players that can't give that. I'd like to believe that even a manager, I mean, maybe I don't know what he was thinking, but even he knows in himself about Scott McTominay. He wasn't suddenly thinking that Scott McTominay has suddenly changed because of he'd scored, was it 4 goals in 2 internationals? Is that right? Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, surely didn't get fooled by that to suddenly think it was going to happen that way because he's better than that. He's been around football long enough to know it doesn't work that way. I've said it for quite a while now. For Manchester United to move up another level and to go on where they should be, Scott McTominay is not in your starting 11, and that has been proven over most of this season. One of the reasons why United are where they are, for them to go to the next level, there's other players that have got to be changed as such, and maybe not be guaranteed to play. I wonder that, he starts with Dalot and he took Dalot off in the League Cup final against Newcastle because he was being rinsed,
yeah.
by Saint Maximin. But yet he starts him against him
Well,
again.
I think that was because Wan-Bissaka was poorly, right?
Mm,
So
yeah.
not left with much of a choice there. But
Well, I'll be honest. I would have looked at maybe some. I would have maybe looked at Lindelof,
yeah,
to be perfectly honest, who can play in that role, who is a better defender. Because you're away from home, going to a side that's got aspirations of still Champions League. You don't want to concede. You don't want to give up space. You don't want a player allowed to actually to cause you problems. So you get your best defender up. You get a better defender up against them.
yeah,
At this, and it didn't go right in that sense. But you do look, and going back to what you're saying, you look at certain players. Luke Shaw, I still, even though amazing that the leap he's made with he had a bit of competition. The leap he's made to where he's got to now has established himself as one of the best left backs in the country. But he has moments, as we saw against Liverpool, where he seems to be losing it. He loses all his composure with the ball and off the ball as well. And he gets to the stage where he wants to keep fouling people, wants to show a kind of a position of strength all the time. I'm stronger than you, rather than just being patient and waiting to get the ball. Silly fouls given away.
yeah,
Call it petulance. When you're under pressure away from home, being Manchester United, given how Newcastle and maybe some of the media turned it into a hate game, a revenge game for some unknown reason. You need the players, and if you've got the right players, they keep their heads. Luke Shaw doesn't keep his head in that situation. He gets embroiled in it. So there is quite a few players who I think everyone knows maybe come in and then they go back out for the right players to come in that position. I still do, as much as he's changed, he's had a phenomenal season. I do still worry about Marcus Rashford. I still
yeah,
have my reservations about him. Yes, he's scoring goals, but if he's not scoring goals, you wonder what he adds. And
yeah,
people say, but it's about goals. Football is about goals. There's too many great goal scorers around, but I do wonder sometimes that when they're not scoring goals, you need that little bit more from them to help when you're away from home. Away from home, you're under the cosh. You need them to be a little bit unselfish and help a little
yeah,
bit and dig in a bit. And he doesn't do that enough. And then when you get on the ball, when you finally get on the ball, you need someone to actually think about it and think, I need to keep this the best possible way rather than just run in a blind alley, lose it, throw your arms in the air and say to your teammates, get it back.
yeah,
And I see it far too often, but goals have got him out of jail. And there's no point going down that road about that little bit of criticism when someone scored a goal because that's always going to be thrown back at you, Wayne. You need
yeah.
some. I think even Sir Alex has turned around and said the team needs other goal scorers.
No, he
Great
did.
teams,
He did, yeah,
great teams do not have one goal scorer.
yeah,
They don't do it. You look at Manchester City at this moment in time. Every time Haaland hasn't played, City score more goals in the game, and they get different goal scorers. They
yeah,
won a league. They won a league doing it that way. If you're reliant on one goal scorer, it doesn't work. Many years ago, in the mid '80s, Everton, Gary Gary Lineker, I think he may have won a Golden Boot while at Everton in that one season. They didn't win the league. The following season, when Gary Lineker's gone, they win the league.
yeah, yeah.
So
No, I think you're right. And Fergie did make that observation, and he's not without his experience at knowing what he's talking about. I look at it and I think where yesterday one of the big issues is the issues when neither of these players play. But I know, just to bang the drum about Casemiro and Eriksen, when you don't have them there, what you don't have, as opposed to when you do have them there, apart from the quality, is the actual care with the pass. Now, and what I mean by that is they care about the position that they put in a teammate, and they're not just interested in playing a pass that looks good. You know, sometimes you'll go, like, for example, Fernandez can play. His vision is fantastic. He can play magnificent passes, and he played one for Anthony that was really good. But by and large, you will get, Luke Shaw can play one of those nice raking passes, but they look good, and they might even reach the target. But once they reach the target, the players got like four players around them, and it doesn't actually make it a good pass. And these are the kind of metrics that statistics don't really analyze. It's like, oh, the pass is good, but look at the situation that you've put the player in. Whereas Eriksen and Casemiro, they actually care about the area of the pitch that they put in their teammate in. They care about what the teammate is going to do with the ball. And I don't think that you see that with a lot of, and maybe you call it a selfish thing, maybe you call it a self-preservation thing. You know, like Harry Maguire's one of those kind of players that his numbers sometimes look deceptively good, and it's because of the fact that he's doing his job in a certain extent to, like, the passes being completed, but that player will then lose the ball easily because they're crowded out of possession. And maybe that's why you see sometimes a player like Scott McTominay, who for 18 months at least has been accused of cowardice by some. I don't know, that's not a word that we've used on the podcast, but in that he doesn't show for the ball. Sometimes he goes missing because of the fact that maybe a teammate isn't going to play him into a good position. Maybe they're playing players into something that gets them out of trouble, but it doesn't really help the the overall team, really. So Ben asks a question, actually. Then he said, "What do you think it is then, Paul? Is it a lack of quality, or is it mental? Because yesterday they didn't really look up for it at all." And I think, if I can jump in first just to answer it, my opinion on it, Paul, is just the drop off that you see when the players, like particularly Casemiro and Eriksen, when they don't play and the rhythm is missing from midfield. I think that the longer that a game of football goes on, the players sort of regress to last season, and they sort of realize, I say realize, maybe they just lack the self confidence to say, we can dictate this game of football, because, to be blunt, history has proven that they can't. And these players are 25, 26, and they're too old to throw that insecurity off the back, and maybe they just can't do that, which is, I mean, that's a different thing to criticizing a player because of, for whatever reason, if they're just not good enough, they're not good enough, and there's no point in constantly saying, "Oh, that player's not good enough." For a long time, we were talking about Eric Bailly and Lindelof as a pair, weren't we? And we were saying, they can't do it, and then you bring in certain players, it's like, can they move on with Maguire? No, they could move on a little bit, but they can't move on to where you want them to be. Is that where we are? I mean, that's the point. I guess I'm saying with Ben. Do you think it's a lack of quality, or do you think there's a mental block in there as well?
I think you have to bring both of them into it. There is a lack of quality with a few players, and they have moved on because the players around them have made a difference. They've lifted them to a level. They've virtually embarrassed them to improve on that issue in their heads, to lift themselves through sheer embarrassment. Otherwise, it make things look really bad for them. And they've done it. But as you know, those players, they will get back to where they were at some point because they haven't got that position, that mental strength to keep going and going. It's not implanted. And if you keep having to ask someone to run, then there's a problem.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that. If they're not willing to do it themselves, then there you are. They're not going to do it. They'll do it for a while when things are great and everyone's seen it. But the moment things switch back and you're looking for it, then just them to do it as to be unselfish and go and do it. They're not going to do it unless you've got the stick out, and you're not going to change those players. So I think there's a lot of players there who could have started that game and looking at that midfield, maybe looking there and going, this ain't right. This ain't going to work. And that affects their game then because they've got no belief in those people around. And I think in certain ways, I think Fernandez is like that.
Yeah.
He looks around and he shows his frustration far too much. You wouldn't give him all your money and let him go to Las Vegas with you and let him get on the table. You wouldn't do it with him. You wouldn't, not in a million years.
No,
Because
I
he shows it as soon as he walks in. People look at him, they go, "Yep, here we go, he's in." There's,
all,
you know,
all on red.
yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah, Mike says here, talk about summer targets is rightly focused on getting a striker, but if Ten Hag doesn't bring in one or two centre midfielders, he'll continue to have Fred and McTominay as backups. And I think Fred's all right in terms of like if you look at him as a squad option from the bench and the differences he made from there, and he's not tasked with winning you a league title, then I think the expectation level is different on him. But you can sort of see when McTominay plays what Ten Hag was hoping to get with De Jong and Casemiro together. You know what I mean? You can see what's missing. You can even see what's missing from the midfield when Casemiro and Eriksen are playing because there's still a dynamism in there, the kind of forward thrusting that you would see with De Jong that you don't get with the other players. I mean, Casemiro's brought it a little because he's got the ability to do that, but there's a natural sort of element to De Jong's play, and I think that's the thing is that with Casemiro and Eriksen, you do have a midfield that's capable of challenging probably for the Premier League, you know, if you add something else in there. But if you add Fred, and not to keep banging on the same drum, but if you don't have those two in and you look at the options that we do have, then it's the same midfield that you struggle to think could dominate any Premier League game.
No, let me ask you. Let me ask you this: when you're talking about Casemiro and Eriksen, when you talk about De Jong, are you talking about De Jong coming into that midfield as well?
Yeah,
Yeah,
not just De Jong. I'm talking. I'm saying De Jong because he was the name that was heavily speculated,
yeah,
and the option that he might be a third person in that midfield, or if not De Jong, another player of that ilk, of that kind of profile of carrying the ball and being a good playmaker with an engine that Ericsson doesn't have. What I
yeah.
mean,
But I'll just look at it, and again, there's could be deemed as controversial because people will talk numbers. That's all it is now. To get out to get away from something that you can't really get into, people just throw numbers at you. But I look at it and I believe that if you're going to go to a certain level and you want to be consistent in that level, you need players who are, of course, who are going to be consistent, but you need players who are disciplined. Now, I always look at, hasn't been mentioned yet, I look at Fernandes, and I would say if you're going to talk about Casemiro and an Eriksen together, you'd get a different player in, another player in,
yeah,
instead of a Rip to come in instead of Fernandes because he's ill disciplined. And I don't mean, yes, we know about he gets volatile and when things ain't going his way, but in the way he plays, and especially in the games of that magnitude, what it was, you need someone, and he's wearing an armband, and you need someone who people going to look at, and they're suddenly going to go, he's chilled,
yeah.
he's relaxed.
You want poker face, don't you? Really?
Yeah, yeah, and he hasn't got that about him, as I mentioned about the Las Vegas situation. So he needs that, and I just and some loads will disagree with me. I know that already because they'll throw his numbers at goal, assist, and yeah, they're great, but you still need to do it when you're away from home in a big game. You need someone who's going to sit in there, and people can look at, and when they're a little bit shaky, you can look at, and he's just going to them, give me it, doing that, and it gives you a chance. And then you're hoping by him doing that to a player that he's going to calm. But he hasn't got that about him because he's fighting his own game.
Yeah,
He's fighting, and you can see it. He's battling himself to keep himself calm, and it's erratic. And it didn't. It needed someone to be calm. And we can both name midfield. I can talk about players who I played with. You can talk about all the midfield players you watched in similar situations at Manchester United. I would, we could talk about when we go to Newcastle and Eric scores that goal, doesn't he? At the far post, comes in off the right and bang. That was in a similar kind of time. And everything about it was very similar.
yeah,
And you had player. You look at it, and you had someone like Eric, and Eric was, as we know about Eric, but All it needed was for, say, i.e., the boss, Brian Robson, or somebody to go and talk to him, and incredible. And yet you look at him and you go, yep, there's someone who's a leader of men,
Yeah,
not by doing that and doing that, just by the way they played.
yeah,
And and I look at it and you think to yourself, when it's right, Fernandez perfect, but more times it's wrong. But and that's where I look at stats and all that. They're the bits that stats can't give you, and that's why you have to watch a game of football rather
yeah,
than look at stats to judge a player. Look at the football, then look at the stats, then look at the football again.
yeah.
And
So
stats can hide so much, Wayne, as you know. And I just think I look at Casemiro, what he gives: massive presence, calmness on the ball, calmness without the ball, a stare that mostly would frighten his mum. And you look at Ericsson, when you give him the ball, he lends it to people. When he gives it in, and then he can find that pass when needed. When you're under the cosh, that one in behind. When you're looking to a team squeezing up to go behind, and then you might look at a De Jong in there. You just might, but as I always keep saying, there's a reason why Fernandez is at the highest level at this time in his career. There's a reason why he's there here now and not before.
yeah, I think you're dead on with what you said there, and it sort of ties into what I was saying earlier with the um, because we see, I know that you and I see football in that same way about numbers and stats and everything, and it's like what I was saying. A pass is a pass, and it might look good on the numbers, but it might not look good on the pitch, depending on the situation that you've put a player in. And we don't. I think one of the observations that I'm coming out with this season isn't so much that we need, like, because our plan A is, let's say A, if we give it letter grades, plan A is A, it's good enough to challenge. Plan B is D or E. And you might say, or someone else might say, well, you need plan B to be like a B or B minus or something. And United, actually, what they actually need, probably, if we're going to be deadly harsh about this, is because Casemiro's 31 and Ericsson's the same kind of age, you're going to need a plan A ready to take over from Casemiro and Ericsson. You need a plan A. Whoever they're bringing in have got to be knocking on that door. They can't be just good enough backup to them now. They've got to be challenging to take their place. And
Yeah, I've
it's a big
said that a
challenge
few
for Ten
times.
Hag
Mm.
um, in the summer for sure. And Vegos, I mean, you mentioned him earlier. I don't want to sort of get too much on his back because he's come in, he's done that job. I think we are at that tipping point where you see the quality is holding United back somewhat, and maybe, I mean, it's asking 6 weeks out of him. Martial, he's not only in the last chance saloon, he's at last orders at last chance saloon. So, I mean, wherever he's going to fit in, I don't know what. I don't think 6 weeks is enough time for him to save his career, but 6 weeks has got to be enough time for him to be self motivated to think, I've at least got to try and get a good move out of this because, it, and United need that because he can be a good player, he can be a great player, and United are going to need that sort of good to great in the next sort of 6 weeks. Because really, like you mentioned earlier in the podcast, and we've said it a few times this season. I joked about it after the derby. Are we in the title conversation? I wanted to believe it, but we would always return to the fact of, well, look at where we were at the start of the season. Look at the sort of fragility that the squad has if we miss one or two players, and unfortunately has come back to bite us. But this is adversity that happens to every team just about in every season. So it's how United respond from that, and they're going to respond to it, Paul, by playing against Brentford and Everton, two teams in very different veins of form. We'll start with Brentford, an entertaining draw at Brighton at the weekend. They're seventh in the table. If that's surprising, they've only lost 5 times. 5 times in the Premier League season. United have lost 7 already. Without being condescending, I reckon at this point they're at 7th place. They're probably, they're not involved in that relegation scrap that goes up to mid-table, even though they're 7th. They're well above that. Without wanting to be condescending, they must be at that point where they're saying, we'll just see where the season takes us from here. Maybe European football, they've got to hope about that. But they've got kind of like a free hit for sort of 10 or 11 games, and that's very dangerous for a team like Brentford, who already took us apart earlier in the season. If they're playing with liberation, that's quite dangerous for a team like United at the moment, isn't it?
Oh, it is without a doubt. That's going to be talked about from today until that game. That's always going to be thrown up there on the media is about what happened at Brentford early in the season. I actually sat and I watched quite a bit of their game. Sat here at home, watched quite a bit of their game against Brighton at the weekend.
Yeah.
Brighton absolutely ran them ragged. It could have been 14-3. It was absolutely incredible. The football at Brighton just all around them. But Brentford don't stop. They got people who will cause you problems. We don't keep the ball anywhere near as good as Brighton.
Mm.
Anywhere near. Just the way they're set up. Just don't. So you have to say not going to have as much of the they're not going to have as much as the ball what Brighton had against Brentford. But Brentford have got a lot of players, pacey players who get up and back. They play away from home and they don't hope to get a result. They believe they can get a result. They've got that good kind of arrogance about them. Everyone questions the manager with his arrogance, but he's got a winning arrogance. He believes in his team. Every time there's a job, anything someone loses their job, they mention his name all the time for every job. That's because he's doing well. But he's a clever man, and he knows that there's no job's going to suit the job he's got at Brentford because the way the club is set up, it makes his job easy because he chooses his own players.
Yeah.
A bit like Graham Potter. You know, he couldn't turn it down, and he ends up going to a club where he's got no say in anything and takes away his managerial skills. So he's cleverer than that to go and do that. So when you talk about a team spirit, Brentford have got that, something that the club has had from their days in the old third division when I
Yeah.
used to play against them in a pre-season local derby as a QPR player. We used to beat them, but we had so many players injured for the first game of the season because the game always ended up with fights.
Yeah.
So they're off the back. They are a proper. It's there written. It's up there on the in the thing community around the stadium and that. But it's a fact. They are what they are. You
Yeah.
know. So it's not the game that United needed after that Newcastle game with a drab performance. And poor result. It's not what they need. But then what it is, it's a learning experience for the manager. Because again, he's going to be able to see a lot of the players and really have a good think about them for next season.
Yeah.
Really have a good think about them and find out more about them again from the weekends prior to the weekend. And now he's going to see him in a game like this where he's looking for someone to show a bit of backbone really in this fixture. But
I,
it's one. I think fans are very much the same as Wayne. The same as what you're thinking, Wayne. They're like this for this game. It's not a game that's needed. It needed a week free, but
yeah.
that's not going to happen if you're Manchester United when you're in an FA Cup and the Europa League. It's not going
Yeah.
to happen.
It's funny because you mentioned Brentford and community, and I think you're dead right with that. And also, I think that was the thing that we were all hoping for with this United squad that they, under Ten Hag and under the improvement that the players who've been brought in have provided, that it added this sense of unity that was lacking last season. And when those players haven't been there, it looks like that disunity is still there, really, which is very concerning. That's the one concerning thing I do have is that I would have thought that the goodwill around the club would have removed that, but there seems to be that maybe it's anxiety about futures at the club. I look at it and think if ever a game where you need to show that kind of unity, it's against Brentford. Well, I don't think it's difficult to manufacture that if it's not there. You can't just create it and pretend it exists because it has to exist in games like the Brentford game. The flip side to that is even if they, the quality over that kind of community, sometimes it does pull through. So United might well win. They might not. I mean, like Mike says here, having Eriksen and Martial back should help the quality and, for the various reasons. And Eriksen might be back on Wednesday, let's say, and Martial might start, and that might be enough to push United through. I don't think, or I would hope that the manager wouldn't be looking at that thinking, oh, that's papered over a few cracks, because the answer isn't in getting a result or performance against Brentford. Well, maybe a performance against Brentford would be a good yardstick, but it's about turning up at the next Newcastle or turning up at the next City away. You know, the away games where United have been they flattered to deceive so much. They really need to pull out a performance in one of those games. Where, to be fair, it looked like they were doing at Arsenal because they stood up to that and they stood up to the rhythm of that game for a long time. But we did have Eriksen in that game, and we didn't have Casemiro, but we did have Eriksen. Larry, just to return to an earlier point that you were saying, Paul, but I know it's a comment that you've made before, and Larry's a first-time commenter, so I'll give him a chance to get your response on this. He says, "Hi guys, I think Luke Shaw is an excellent footballer without being an excellent defender. My issue with him is that when the chips go down, he goes missing." I think that first sentence, Paul, is something that you would agree with, right? He's an excellent footballer without being an excellent defender. Sometimes when he's a really good form and that's his level of concentration, he can be an excellent defender. He can be an excellent defender, but I think the general rule of him being a good footballer without being a good defender is probably a fair assessment.
Yeah, without a doubt. And the thing that makes him look good, because he gets in it, he gets on. But when United are going forward, that takes away what's going the other way. So we
Yeah.
don't see that side of him. But when you see him under the cosh, that's when he loses his discipline. And that's when he starts trying to block people. That's when he's shoving unnecessary. So he becomes very lazy as a defender. He doesn't really want to work hard going the other way.
Yeah.
And which is obviously he's lost as the years gone on, because when he was at Southampton as a youngster, he was excellent. He was like somebody, and he's a South London boy as well. And he was like another Kenny Sanson in the way he played. He was tenacious, he was quick, with and without the ball. And you see when he gets forward, his dribbling skills and his fantastic left foot, very much like Kenny Sanson in the way he played. And big things were expected of him, and they were, until the point of when he initially got that injury, that when he with that leg in Europe, and it's taken a while to bounce back. But you can see it. And the reason why he's left back for his country, because he's been playing that well consistently. But then when it has gone wrong in certain games, which you've seen over the last few weeks, he has really, really disappointed. Really, and he's gone back into his old ways. So on that part, of it, I have to, that first part of the question, I'd have to agree.
Yeah. I think the thing is though, like, he does bounce. He's resilient. Obviously, he's resilient. I think the news is that he's been rewarded with a new contract, and I think he deserves that. Whether or not he's the defender that is in the team at left back next time United win a league title, I'm not sure. But um, I would say earlier on I said that Martial, whatever happens in the next 6 weeks, he'll probably get moved on. We don't have that danger with Luke Shaw. He should recover. Hopefully, he will recover his form and confidence, and United will have a fullback capable of being a first teamer for the next 2 or 3 years. We'll be fighting with Malacia, and hopefully that'll bring out the best in each other. Just want to see Malacia kick on as well. So after Brentford, Paul, it's going to be Everton. Very different configuration with Everton. They're in the bottom three. The recent form's been poor. They sacked Frank Lampard, who was manager last time they came here in the Cup in January. They look like the kind of team who could get sucked into that sort of whirlwind that's happening in the relegation zone. Because apart from Southampton, there doesn't seem to be a team who's kind of like really anchored into it. And Everton look like they've got the kind of storm of problems that will keep them in that issue, which still doesn't make it an easy game for United if they can't control the middle of the pitch on Sunday against Everton. On Saturday, I think 12:30. What do you make of that one? I mean, it's going to be difficult for different reasons that the Brentford game is, because you're going to look at a team who are coming to Old Trafford unapologetically trying to get a point, right?
Yeah, I mean, they don't score generally more than one goal in a game. They don't generally concede more than 2 goals. But it's about they could. It's not going to be a pretty game at all. You can't expect it to be that, unless Manchester United. The adage is, or the football speak is, you hope that you'll go there as a fan and you say to yourself, I really hope we score early. As a fan, you'll say that. And then that completely changes the whole context of what Everton are going to have to do. It will completely change it. The longer that game goes on at 0-0, it's gonna get maybe a little bit nail biting, especially with dead ball situations with certain players that haven't got who can maybe pull something out of the hat. But Everton are in that position. There's a lot of teams who are very, very fortunate down there, but there's 12 teams in it. There's never this time of the season we're normally got at least one team that we've nailed to the wall. You're going down.
Yeah.
There's not one at this moment in time. Someone might come out and say Southampton. Well, I was there yesterday at Southampton game, and they were poor. West Ham were poor, but in a better way because of they won the game, and that's all you can say. You know, when you got a set of headphones on there, and you suddenly realise I can't go home here. I've got to stay to the end and talk about this. That's when you realise that you know that you're having a bad day at the office because it was dreadful. The
Yeah.
game. It was hard to talk about. And when you look at that, you look at Everton, and Everton will fall into that as well. It's the way they've been, it's what they've become. We all know they've got the issues straight away, rather than people try and talk anything positive about Everton, or we talk about their football. Everyone starts looking at the monetary issues now with Everton if they go down, and that's what the talk's going to be about. If they go down and FFP in the Championship, and so that's where Everton have fallen to at this moment in time, which is such a shame for a club like that. So the two games that United have got at home, quite a few years back, nailed on 6 points, guaranteed 6 points without a shadow of a doubt. Everyone would have been there on it. It will take seriously brave people to say that United are going to walk away with it from their next two home games with 6 points.
Yeah. We're not that brave. I'm not, certainly I'm not going to be doing that. But, to look at it in a positive aspect, 6 points, considering the run that United have been on, 6 points by the time that we're talking next Monday morning will be transformational in terms of how it sets up United's last sort of few games of the season, because it really will help give them a buffer in the top four, which they desperately need. So
It will do. I mean, sorry, Wayne, but you look at the bottom. You go and win two games, and you're in that bottom 12. Well, West Ham, because they scored that one goal, they went from 19th to 14th. That's how mad it was. And you know that if United were to win the two games, and we're
yeah,
talking about talking again next Monday, that will make a big difference, because we know that there's going to be things that are going to happen up there, which is going to it's going to change again. There's
yeah,
there isn't guarantees at this moment in time in the Premier League when you do look at it.
yeah,
The only team that's really showing anything really of any great consistency is a team that's at the top of the league.
yeah,
They're the only ones really. City have had their ups and downs and whatever, but I mean maybe they're getting to the point where they're looking at what they're doing, and maybe Haaland not being available might get them back to them, the ones who are, when you put them down, as guaranteed 3 points. But at the moment, there's one team who you turn around and say we're going to get 3 points.
yeah,
Hopefully, I put something on it now. They might not go and get those 3 points at their next fixture, but you
yeah.
know, but
No,
they're the only ones.
I think it's interesting though you say that, because there's been a lot of sort of renewed conversation about the quality of the league over the last sort of 6 weeks or so, and I think you're saying that you went to a relegation scrap, and the quality was of two teams who really are in the mess. One ended up in 14th at the end of the day, and I think sooner or later a lot of people are going to sort of look at the truth with this league, because United, like I said, at least when they lost games in the past, it would be like, well, they ended the game like throwing everything at it and looking like they were going to get something out of it. And yesterday they could have played 180 minutes and they would have probably only ended up with 3 shots on target or something like that.
Yeah,
Not enough to win the game. And I look at that and I think, if this United team, with such a drop off in chasm in quality, when they're just missing two players, can still be in comfortable contention for the Champions League, and the other teams in there are Spurs with all their problems, and Liverpool with all of their problems as well. You think, good grief, then, and like you mentioned, City are sort of fleeting with their consistency. Arsenal are the only consistent side, and they're comfortably at the top, and the rest of the division looks like a mess. And I maintain that even with United, I don't think that United winning or losing is an indication of the strength of the league. I just think sometimes you look at it and you say, if United are higher, like they're finishing higher than what they were last season, you know what I mean, in the top 7, I wouldn't have expected their finishing, their actual quality of squad.
Yeah.
How would they
I will
finish?
ask. I will ask Wayne. Not asking you the question. I'm just me myself, and I get my own little bit now. What actually makes the league the best, the so-called best league in the world? When we got Liverpool and Man City at the top of the league, and they both got 90 odd points, this is the greatest league in the world by that media company on the TV. But then when we're in this situation, we're not hearing it. But as a foot as a football fan, and I'm a football fan because I love football, not because I support a team or anything like that. You're a big football fan. You love your football club, but you love football as well. Wouldn't this be a great? Isn't this a good league now because we've got competition? The league is interesting. 6 weeks on, we don't know who's going to win the league. We do not know who's going to finish in the bottom 3. Not one name. People are having punted, but there's nothing guaranteed because of the margins. Middle of the table, we do not know who's going to get guaranteed Champions League. We do not know who's champion Europa League or the Conference League. So this, in my opinion, makes this league the best league in at least Europe because there's competition in every position in that league. So that's my way. Not because of all of a sudden 2 teams have got 90 odd points and they're the greatest teams ever because they got 90 odd points. That tells you that the league is rubbish because
Yeah,
they can take points at will whenever they want. Oh, we'll have that point. We just take that. Now everyone is having to work hard. This is like Football League, early Premier League at this moment in time when we could go to Selhurst Park and play against Wimbledon or Palace and we're under the threat of being beaten. Every
yeah.
time we went there no fan would go, "Oh, this is a gimme." There was no guarantees. Where now, over last number of seasons, it's been Man City, Liverpool, whoever going there and going, "Well, that's 3 points. What are the rest of them going to do there?" I think it's really good for football fan to be enjoying this moment.
Yeah, no, I agree. I see what you're saying. What I would say is that there are 2 areas in which I look at it, and it's quality and competitiveness. Now,
Mm.
I completely agree with. I think that if you've got 2 teams racketing close to 100 points or over that, that's a sign of no competition in the league, and I don't think that's an indication of a good league. I'm not sure, but if it's better to have the competition that we've got this season. I don't know if that translates into better quality because, like you said, I'm thinking of early Premier League years, and I think I can remember Everton playing Wimbledon in a relegation game, and it was fantastic to watch. It was like Oldham being on the verge of relegation, but getting to the semi-finals, and sometimes you do get those kind of odd stories. I just the way that I look at it is like City will always kind of respond by hoovering up like the best players. Newcastle are now in a position where they'll be stockpiling like they'll be stockpiling Ivan Toney, for example, players like who've impressed from the mid sort of region Premier League clubs. They'll be hoovered up by the likes of Newcastle, and then it creates this sort of top end of. It looks like the top end of the league is stacked with quality, but it doesn't really always turn out that way. And I don't know. It's just I'm still undecided on whether I think it's improving in quality because of that level in competition, but I prefer to see this level of competition. Like I said, with a team like Arsenal, as much as I don't like Arsenal, but I prefer to see them at the top rather than 2 teams racketing over 100 points just because of the fact that they've become more consistent and they can easily defeat the smaller sides. I think the proof in the pudding, and don't get me wrong, you watch West Ham play Southampton, that's 2 teams fairly low on confidence who are struggling. You do still get entertaining games at the bottom of the league. You know what I mean? You will get those and in the mid-table and everything like that. So I don't know. I agree with the general opinion that it's better than it was. Whether or not I still think it's reflective of a league that calls itself the best in the world, I'm not so sure. But then again, you look at that stockpiling of squad players and everything, and look at the damage that's done to the Italian game, to the Spanish game, to the German game, and whether or not there's quality there as well. Maybe it's
Yeah.
just, maybe I'm just getting old and grumpy. Paul, football's not what it used to be like.
No,
Um,
no. I mean, I've been talking about all that for ages. I've been talking about the Spanish and the Italians league and what they done many years ago. The Italians, they put up restrictions to stop so many foreign players coming in, didn't they? So
yeah,
they could produce their own. And have we got to go that way? Have we got to go that way to protect our own players rather than everybody and just allowing all this money just to be spent and use that word stockpiling? We're virtually, cramping players' abilities to play football because they're all going to chase the money and just go and happy to be at a big club, but play maybe 15, 20 games a season. How does that make sense?
yeah.
You
That's
know, so
that's the direction. That's the direction at the moment. Um, One of the things that I'm proud about United for, at least like generally speaking, they'll give more chances than most clubs will to youth players, and it still means something in that regard.
mm,
Anyway, Monday morning moan over and done with. Let's hope that next Monday morning we're happy because it's a very positive week. If you've enjoyed the podcast, be sure to give us a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done that already. If you're listening back on the audio podcast, be sure to give us a review on the platform you're listening on. We'll be back next week. Until then, stay safe, stay well, and thanks for listening and watching.